right, joining me now to discuss free speech within the context of Pamela Geller's Islamophobia are Daily Beast columnist Michael Moynihan and Zahra Billoo, Executive Director and Council of American Islamic Relations in the San Francisco Bay Area. Zahra, let me start with you. What do you make of the fact that we've now seen the right, by and large, sort of distance itself, reject Geller in the wake of this event?
You know, it's unfortunate that it's these tragic circumstances that are forcing the narrative to shift, but it's also a relief that even people on the same political spectrum as Pamela Geller recognize how damaging she is, and that what she's really doing is championing hate and bigotry.
Okay, so here's my feeling about this, and I want to get both your responses. Yeah. We had this debate about Charlie Hebdo, and it was so horrific in many ways, and then it became sort of a debate about the actual content of the Charlie Hebdo speech, because everyone says, well, obviously no one should be murdered for anything they write, clearly. But am I je suis Charlie? Do I really want to endorse what they did, right? And there's a debate about that. Geller, there's not really debate. Like, it really is ugly stuff, right? Mm-hmm. My feeling, though, in the wake of this is that there's some part of me that feels that if the thing you're worried about is doing an event that will provoke two people rolling up in body armor and automatic weapons trying to murder people, then it actually weirdly is important that you do that, or it's important that that be done. Like, this idea that this was a provocation, which, yes, it was a provocation, but I don't care if it was a provocation if what it's provoking is attempted murder, because I want to live in a society that is essentially not okay and not tolerated.
Yeah, I mean, I want to have a conversation. You know, there are two separate conversations here. Pamela Geller's odious and cretinous views are on display for everyone to see. And
right.
there's a number of people on the right, I don't consider myself part of that, but they have denounced her, thank God. The other thing is that, I think the bigger problem here is I don't like the fact that we are again, after Charlie Hebdo, litigating the content of Pamela Geller's blog posts and her, silly contest. What it strikes me is if it's a provocation to murder, to have a bunch of kind of 50 knuckle draggers who think Islam is like the worst, it's not radical Islam, right. It is Islam. Right. If it's provoking people into gunfire, that's the bigger problem, right? There's nothing that can provoke me. I mean, I understand that people are offended by this, but, you can't pull out a gun. That seems like an obvious point. But that said, there is no legal sort of regime here that says this, free speech, is it free speech or hate speech? I saw this today. Right. I mean, it can be both.
Right.
It is.
It's hateful, but it's still protected.
But not hate speech in the sort of European sense that it's illegal.
Right. What do you think, Zahra?
Michael took the words out of my mouth. It's two conversations, but in thinking about this, I actually think it's three. So one is how horrible and hateful Pamela Geller and her people, her allies, are. The other is, of course, that all violence should be condemned. There should be no words that could provoke me or anyone else to violence. And I think that everyone in talking about Garland, Texas, is in agreement about that. I'm not hearing disagreement. They're also not the only people committing violence. So violence happens for numerous reasons. It should always be condemned. And then the third is the free speech issues themselves. And I would say that I would also agree with what I'm hearing Michael say, is that I'm not advocating for a litigation of the content of the speech, but rather conversation about what does free speech mean and how do I want to use that to promote mutual understanding and to expose the bigotry that others are spreading.
Right, and so here's what I want to say. So I agree with all of that, but here's an example of how I think of this from where I sit, right? If we were going to do a segment that was about someone that was advertising on the network, and I was kind of on the fence about it or actually didn't even like the segment, right? I thought it was a little unfair maybe. But then someone came to us and said, you can't do that segment because of an advertiser. I'd be like, well, now we have to do the segment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it has to be the case that we can do that segment,
this
right?
This is when free speech is necessary.
And so what I don't like is the notion that there are people going to be making calculations, particularly like a venue. Like, do we want to give our venue over to this thing? And the calculation they're making isn't a calculation of, do I think this person's bigoted or odious, but is this going to create a security footprint that I'm not comfortable with? Because that seems to me to be a real threat to free speech.
Yeah. I mean, I think
we would agree. I don't think that personal safety should be what determines how and when I speak, or what you're permitted to say, or what we choose to say. But I also don't think that Pamela Geller is a champion of free speech. Examples of her own work advocating against First Amendment rights include what you mentioned about Park 51, her opposition to Al Jazeera. She's not a free speech advocate. She is an anti-Muslim advocate.
Yeah, and that's a key point, right? Like,
this is an important point. And when I was at the Daily Beast, I published a fantastic piece by somebody who is a free speech fundamentalist, but he said, hey, let's hang on here. In note, when there was a rumor going around that, and I can't remember which African country had banned Islam, they celebrated. That is not anyone who celebrates free speech. Right. But, you know, the thing is, this idea, I really hope that people get away from this idea of it's a provocation. Right. And we shouldn't provoke things. I don't want, you know...
I think that's the word that I found bothersome. And it's a word, and again, we're talking about a person that I really just do, like, I find her views odious. That word that has been popping up on Fox News that I think I've been uncomfortable
It's very strange, and I think that the idea of that the person being odious is it doesn't matter, because there are things that there are people that aren't odious that provoke people with religious beliefs into violence, whether it's two men holding hands in the wrong neighborhood. That's a provocation to people who are very religious.
Michael Moynihan and Zahra Billoo, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. That is all in